let me share a few thoughts on the role of LiFi in 6G. I guess one of the major trends in 6G is really what people calling the metaverse, so the real convergence of communications, computing, and sensing. And this is really enabling new devices and new sort of robots that interact with our environments. And it's a forecast by BBC here, about 40% of our sort of boring jobs at home and so on will be taken over by robots. And that changes a lot in terms of how we build these systems and what it's required. The key two areas that really drive that vision is the autonomous systems that I've mentioned. That means sort of robots, drones, cobots, and so on. And the other thing is the digital twin. So we're trying to model the real world, our physical world, our real environments in the digital domain, and that's digital twins. And overall, we're talking about a cyber-physical continuum. And these things interact with our real world environment in a smart way that helps our lives. So if we then take a look at how intelligent systems like us, people, humans, are doing that, it's really three with these building blocks in building, having a rich sort of ecosystem of senses around, and then we have a nervous system, and then we have the brain nervous system, and then we have the actuators, the legs, arms, and the voice that interact with the environment. And that's something we want to replicate. And when we do that, we need to be careful and in terms of the nervous system, because we don't want to have any malicious attack there to feed in some viruses. So that's why, I mean, we modeling that in a technical world is really on the sensing side, really building a rich sensing environment capability, connecting a rich set of sensors to what is then later called the cloud, the fog, the mist, the edge computing, the really computing part of the whole thing. And then we need a nervous system again. And then we have the machine-to-machine interfaces, machine-to-environment, the various interfaces that interact with the environment that need to be developed. We can call it robotics. So now there is really good sort of work been done on the robotics side. Here, for example, the latest work by a group in Cambridge building a robotic hand, which is not hard material, it's soft material, and that allows them to create new ways of touching, sensing, and holding. But it also changes a lot in terms of the feedback loops, because everything or a lot of things become nonlinear. So you need more sensors, and you see here there's still a lot of cables involved in that robotic hand. So what is if you can replace these cables? And that there is a nervous system we need to build, and wireless would be the best choice. And then we still go into the metaverse and the AR, VR, mixed reality. You see the big corporate bringing products out in that space, but still a lot of cables required. And in really having immersive experience, you need very high data rates for those devices. And then we also need to build, and that's part of the 6G vision, creating equality in terms of equal access to data, equal access to high-speed data. And that can be done and primarily requires non-terrestrial networks, so LEO, GEO, and MEO, or satellites, to be part of the entire mix. And you need connectivity. And I believe optical wireless has a part to play there as well. And then obviously we also want to go non-terrestrial in the sense of underwater communication networks. There's a lot of requests and demand in for example, defense industry there. So quoting a famous sort of hero, Tesla, who said, if you apply wireless perfectly, the whole earth converts into a huge brain. And that's what he said, I think, 1926. What a wise man. And I think we are on that trajectory in some way. So really here summarizing, we want to basically map the real world into the physical world, create new autonomous systems with that. And I would say there's four key things that are required. Is capacity. It is net zero. So Dominic very nicely mentioned the energy part and how we need to reduce energy in order to make our life, our planet, sustainable. We need to talk about availability. So data everywhere for everyone, regardless of where they are. and security. And the nervous system is a one very, very critical part of that system vision. So with these 4 big categories, now we can break it down, and there's some work here done by colleagues in Southeast University in China, it's a vision paper here in tutorials and surveys, and you see that now a bit more fine-grained. But what I wanted to highlight here is obviously 6G drives all these KPIs: data rate, area data rate, energy efficiency, the connectivity, the number of devices connected, the density, the coverage. But more importantly, what in red is something that's coming in new is the sensing capabilities, and the reliability capability and coverage. So and these areas I really want to highlight how optical wireless communications can really help driving these KPIs. And let me start with the capacity. So I mean, a simple example here is if we want to have a real immersive experience in sort of 3-dimensional holographic displays, we talk about sort of about 19 gigapixels, and if we want to have real-time updates and gesture sort of recognition and expression capture, then we talk about data rates of about 1 terabit per second for such a link. If you do it if you want to really have high quality holographic displays. And communication system currently in the RF basically struggle to get spectrum efficiencies of 10 bits per second per hertz. If you then break that down, you need 100 gigahertz of bandwidth. I think that's really hard to find in the RF domain. So we really have to leverage these sort of 1,000 times higher spectrum in the optical domain. That's I mean, you've seen this slide maybe many times, but really the high availability of spectrum in the optical domain is one of the key drivers. You can argue you can find 100 gigahertz as well in the terahertz range, so between say sub-terahertz, 200 gigahertz to 10 terahertz, but there's still a big sort of gap required, a lot of research required to fill that terahertz gap, because the output power in this range of devices at the moment are really sub 1 milliwatt, and that's not sufficient for mobile communications. And Dominic already highlighted, if we then take the optical devices that exist, such as the vertical cavity surface emitting lasers, VCSELs, it's integrated in all your laptops, in all your smartphones for face recognition. Very efficient, very high power if you want. You need to make sure that's eye safe, but you can create an access point that we shown here in that paper with a grid of beam with the sort of 225 beams covering an entire room, and that is the ultimate cell densification, because a communication cell there is only 40 centimeter in diameter. So you can steer the energy where you need it. You can make sure that no one within outside a cone can intercept that beam, so it's more secure. And if you saw shown later, the power overall is also reduced because of that confinement and the way the system is sort of architected. So the other point is, Dominic, really, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but Dominic did a fantastic job in highlighting the net zero requirement. And I have slightly outdated data here from a report that is found in the link that you see there below. Is that here you need to highlight, it's not electricity. What we show here is the greenhouse gases emissions. And the ICT really represents about 2 to 4% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. And the operators have a share of about 2%, 1.5 to 2%, and that's the more that the aviation. And you see here as well with the Internet of Things as a precursor for that system vision of the autonomous systems. You see, automotive is a big consumer of data, and that's growing. It's a growing area because of the sort of autonomous driving, the drones as well, and so on. So you have already the spread into various sort of segments of the industry. But there is something that really has to be considered, and that's, people call it a Jevons paradox. That means if you save something, if you get things more efficient, that means people use it more because it's more efficient, and overall the energy consumption rises. And as you see here in this graph and the last bullet, the energy consumption of ICT has been rising by 5% per year, and that is also reflected in Dominic's sort of slides and his prediction into 2030. I think therefore it's with a bit of a pinch of salt and some caveat when we talk about making communication systems more energy efficient. I personally think that the main way of reducing carbon greenhouse gas emissions is really to bring in renewable energies into powering our networks, because of that. And you see in the graph there, it's only up to 2018, but despite the growth of energy consumption of networks, the greenhouse gas emissions have come down. And that is primarily because of the sustainable, the green energies that have been put into the mix of energy supplies. So with that, I'd like to link that work with sort of renewable energy using solar panels that they are at the forefront of renewables. And so what we've done here is we can use the same device as well as a data receiver. So linking those two utilities you see here in the diagram with the off-the-shelf solar panel, and at the bottom you see sort of the way we split out the data channel with an equalizer, and then with the DC output as well, which is energy. So essentially we harvest noise. Noise is ambient light. There's few challenges along the way. One is that, as you see on the graph here, the more energy you harvest, the less data you can receive because of saturation effects in the solar cell. And that's a challenge. So some technical challenges that basically come across the way, and we've basically partially solved these challenges. And then if you look at data rates, usually solar panels are very slow, big capacitors. So if you go to silicon-based solar cells, that's the fact. But there's new devices on the horizon, and here's some work we do with the German Fraunhofer in Freiburg using gallium arsenide, so 3,5 semiconductors. And you see that in the blue graphs here, we show a few plots in terms of data rates, the scale on the left. And I mean, there's some work, broken some sort of boundary, some threshold in achieving over 1 gigabit per second with a single gallium arsenide solar photovoltaic cell using optimum bit and power loading, as you see on the right. So these devices are really not only for low rate data communications, but also for high speed. And the applications I'll come to that in a minute, but really for FSO and also perhaps for inter-satellite communications. And that brings me to the third point of need, and where we have opportunities with optical wireless communications is on creating available networks worldwide, and non-terrestrial networks are at the forefront of those. And see some, sorry for this slightly poor resolution, but it's a diagram taken from that publication there. Colleagues of Slim, Looney, and others. It's really building these mesh networks of satellite to aerial platforms and aerial platforms to ground platforms, requiring data rates above sort of 20 gigabit per second, and allowing as well connectivity. And with optical wireless, there's some benefits when it comes to Doppler, which is a major problem in RF for those kind of links. So this is an area where this technology has a real home as well. And now we've basically connected both requirements and both capabilities, energy efficiency and availability, with a vision like this. in off-the-shelf, and there's many off-the-shelf FSO systems, the major problem is not the communications capability. The major problem is the beam acquisition and tracking, so making sure that the beam always hits the detector, which is relatively small compared to the distance it covers, up to maybe more than 1,000 kilometers in the case of LEO satellites. So really, beam alignment is a key problem. If you could get rid of the beam alignment in the system, you reduce the cost dramatically. And that's an advantage you want to play by exactly this vision. Here you have a laser sort of a station here at the hills that basically communicate to that roof with a high-speed data link. And it doesn't really matter where the beam should hit that large panel. It is therefore giving that cost efficiency gain. So that was the vision we put out 2015, and then we built that system. And with off-the-shelf solar panels that you see here, you see the box. It has a VCSEL laser inside, about 200 milliwatt, and we have two systems on a lighthouse at one of the most remote islands in the Orkneys in the north of Scotland. And we couldn't drill holes in the building. It's a listed building. So that's why we had to put sandbags on it. So there's no beam acquisition and tracking in that system. Very simple. And we've supplied sort of relatively high-speed communication links to two homes on the Orkneys, where I need to say that their data was 2 megabit per second with a copper ADSL cable, and they couldn't use high-definition TVs on the island. But with that system, they could later on. And here you see on the garage of one of the homes the corresponding other system to send that.
Harald,
and here's a little bit of a
Harald, you have
because it's an off-the-shelf solar panel. I mean, you, as I said earlier, you have to live with the high sort of low bandwidth. So, but nonetheless, the data rate we supplied there was between sort of 5 and 10 megabit per second, and you see that the weather has an effect. Sunlight has an effect. So sunlight degraded the data rate slightly as expected, but also rain degraded the data rates, basically almost halved it, but it never went to zero. And it basically stood there for 3 months in our trial, and we were able to provide data to these homes. And now we are working on getting that to make gigabits per second in longer distances.
Harald, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes left. Can you hear me, Harald?
I mean, it's well known. Light doesn't go through walls, which is a fantastic benefit. But also light with that system I've shown earlier, with a beam sort of confinement in a certain area in a room, that also creates security inside a room, and that's what we've done here in a study using a modulation scheme that's called generalized phase shift keying in a room. And when we've plotted the eavesdropper bit error ratio here with these color plots. So 0.5 is basically a random guess. The eavesdropper won't be able to extract really sensible information. And we have two users here in that room, two red squares, and that particular plot here shows the eavesdropper bit error ratio if they were to listen to the leftmost user here. And you notice that only very close to that user they can basically get to data rates that are sensible. So blue means quite low data rates, but as soon as they go away half a meter or so, you notice that the bit error ratio really drops dramatically off the eavesdropper. So essentially what it means for that system, that your next neighbor is your eavesdropper. So and that's something someone you see and you discover quite easily. So even if there are windows in that room, what I'm trying to say is you can make sure that the physical layer security can be designed to be very, very secure in such a scenario. So that brings me to my concluding remarks. I think optical wireless communications is in my view is a key to achieving these step change improvements in 6G. And that's really around capacity, net zero, pervasive coverage, and security. And I've given a few examples. I couldn't go into all the details in all of these areas, but I think there is now a great opportunity, given that 6G is now being defined worldwide, to really push that technology into that standardization. And we need to get more people convinced of the benefits that technology brings. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.